future of Greenland and Denmark decided solely by the people of Denmark. In Greenland, we know that. It's why we cooperate, as I said at the start, and I'll finish here, why we cooperate culturally, why we cooperate economically, and why we cooperate in security.
French President Emmanuel Macron stood before ambassadors at the Élysée Palace, and his words were deliberate and unprecedented as he stated that the United States is an established power, but one that is gradually turning away from some of its allies and breaking free from the very international rules that it was until recently promoting. With no diplomatic hedging, no polite softness, and a direct accusation that the United States is abandoning allies and dismantling the international order America helped build. One day earlier, German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier delivered an equally stunning warning, saying, "The world is turning into a den of thieves where the most unscrupulous take whatever they want, where regions or entire countries are treated as the property of a few major powers," and within 24 hours, two of Europe's most powerful leaders both declared that American partnership has become fundamentally unreliable, which was not spontaneous frustration, but coordinated strategic messaging designed to signal that the Western alliance as it existed for 80 years is over. What happened behind these declarations is even more dramatic, as Canada and Europe are building formal alliance structures that deliberately exclude the United States from coordination roles, while Prime Minister Mark Carney chose Europe over America for his first foreign trip as leader, and President Donald Trump's threats to annex Greenland and invade Canada convinced America's closest allies to write the United States out of the security architecture that has defined the Western world since World War II. When Mark Carney was sworn in as Prime Minister of Canada on March 14, 2025, the traditional first foreign trip for any Canadian leader was always to Washington to meet the President of the United States and reaffirm the special relationship. But instead, Carney went to Paris and London, where he met Emmanuel Macron on March 17, and Macron welcomed him warmly, saying, "We are welcoming a friend, and we are receiving you with a lot of joy," as Carney told Macron that Canada is the most European of non-European countries and promised to be a reliable, trustworthy, and strong partner. Then Carney traveled to London to meet with United Kingdom Prime Minister Keir Starmer and had a private audience with King Charles III, with symbolism that was unmistakable as Canada's new Prime Minister deliberately chose Europe over America for his first international engagement, while Trump was publicly threatening to make Canada the 51st American state, imposing 25% tariffs on Canadian goods and calling Carney's predecessor Justin Trudeau a governor instead of prime minister. Carney's message to Trump from London was blunt, as he called Trump's plan to annex Canada unthinkable and disrespectful, and said the President of the United States needed to stop such comments before they could sit down and have a conversation about their broader partnership, while also disclosing that Canada was reconsidering whether to purchase American-supplied F-35 fighter jets and confirming he had spoken with both United Kingdom and French officials about deepening security, military, and economic ties with Europe, not the United States. The shift from symbolic to structural happened on June 23, 2025, when Canada and the European Union signed the Security and Defense Partnership, which is a formal framework coordinating defense procurement, cyber security, artificial intelligence, governance, and military capability development, and this partnership is designed to reduce Canadian dependence on American defense suppliers after decades in which Canada spent most of its defense budget purchasing American equipment and operating under American strategic coordination, which is now being restructured to route through Europe instead. What this means in practice is Canada negotiating participation in security action for Europe known as SAFE, which is the European Union's €150 billion joint purchase loan pool that allows European Union member states to pool purchasing power for military equipment, so instead of each country negotiating separately, they negotiate collectively, which creates leverage and standardization across European militaries. Canada negotiating participation means Canadian defense procurement will increasingly happen through European supply chains using European equipment standards coordinated with European military planning, while American defense contractors that assumed permanent Canadian market access are being systematically replaced by European alternatives. And on December 1, 2025, Prime Minister Carney announced the conclusion of negotiations for Canada's participation in safe, with no mention of the United States and no suggestion that American coordination or approval was required. The French and German presidential speeches in early January 2026 crystallized what had been building for months, as both leaders declared that the United States could no longer be trusted as a partner and that the power-graded international order America built was collapsing because America was dismantling it, with Emmanuel Macron telling French ambassadors that every day people wonder whether Greenland will be invaded, whether Canada will be under threat of becoming the 51st state, or whether Taiwan will be further circled, calling it the greatest disorder, the law of the strongest, while rejecting what he called new colonialism and insisting Europe must achieve greater strategic autonomy and less dependence on the United States. Frank-Walter Steinmeier warned against allowing the world to turn into a den of thieves, where the most unscrupulous take whatever they want, calling it a breakdown of values by America, which helped build the world order, and saying Russia's invasion of Ukraine was one watershed moment, but American behavior under President Donald Trump marked a second epochal rupture. These were carefully prepared speeches delivered to diplomatic corps and broadcast internationally designed to signal Europe was making a fundamental strategic shift away from American partnership, with timing that was deliberate, as both speeches came days after Trump authorized the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro by American special forces, violating Venezuelan sovereignty and international law, while also coming amid escalating American threats to annex Greenland by military force. Trump's threats to take Greenland by force became the rallying point for European-Canadian coordination, and on January 7, 2026, 7 countries issued a joint statement defending Greenland's sovereignty, including France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Spain, the United Kingdom, and Canada, all NATO allies reaffirming that Greenland belongs to its people and Denmark's sovereignty must be respected, which was unprecedented, as NATO allies publicly coordinated against an American territorial claim. Carney met with Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen on January 6 in Paris and announced that Canada's Governor-General Mary Simon and Foreign Affairs Minister Anne-A Ta Anand would visit Greenland in early February to open a new Canadian consulate there, establishing a formal diplomatic presence, specifically in response to American threats and signaling support for Greenland's right to determine its own future. A poll released on January 9 by German public broadcaster ARD showed 76% of Germans felt the United States was not a reliable partner, while only 15% trusted America, which is the lowest level ever recorded. And 77% of Canadians opposed becoming the American 51st state, according to January polling. The infrastructure being built now is not temporary, as the security and defense partnership, Canada's participation in safe and coordinated positions on Greenland represent permanent institutional changes that create path dependency, meaning once Canada routes defense procurement through European supply chains, this does not reverse when American leadership changes, and what is being built now will define Canada-Europe relations for decades. For 80 years, American leadership of the Western Alliance was automatic, but that assumption just died, as Canada and Europe are building security architecture that functions independently of American coordination, while Trump assumed threats would make allies more compliant and believed they had no alternatives. But every assumption was wrong, because allies built alternatives, and now those alternatives are operational, and the transatlantic relationship as it existed since 1945 is over.